Hello, my name is Jewel Miller, and I am the author of this book, Whisper of Love. It contains many delightful stories about my paternal grandmother, Maudie Borntrager. Well, that was the name her mother and father gave her when she was born, way back in 1903. But when she was in school, she changed her name to something else. You'll have to listen to the book to learn what it was. The following chapters are filled with true stories about life on the Kansas and New Mexico prairies in the early 20th century. You'll hear about family life, farm life, working as a maid for other families as a young girl, and best of all, how she met Sam Knepp, the boy with whom she eventually fell in love with. And now, let's get into it. Chapter 1. Prairie Milkmaid. "Can I really, Mother?" 6-year-old Maudie Borntrager asked in surprise. "Well, we'll see how it goes," Mother answered patiently. "It takes lots of muscles to milk a cow, and your arms are still quite thin." Maudie lived on the wild prairie of western Kansas in a large 2-story house that Father had built. Her parents were Amish, and their family and church people spoke Pennsylvania Dutch, German. However, they used English when they visited with those who couldn't understand the Dutch. This was why they called non-Amish people English. Yet, their Amish lifestyle did not differ greatly from their English neighbors. It was 1910, and no one had such luxuries as electricity, cars, and telephones. Maudie loved the treeless prairie, their home, and even the wind that seemed to blow constantly. Maudie had wanted to milk a cow for a long time. To think that she finally could, well, it was almost too good to be true. She skipped outside to the milk house and took a tin pail off a hook on the wall. Then, picking up a one-legged stool that Father had made, she went to look for Gidley, her 4-year-old brother. She swung the pail round and round her head, never stopping to think that it would be hours until chore time. "Milkmaid, Milkmaid," a teasing voice called to her from the darkness inside the barn. "Ah, you Gidley, where are you?" "Right here, playing with the cats again. You're going to turn into a cat yourself if you keep playing with them all the time." Maudie peered behind the oats barrel and saw him stroking Puff, the large gray mama cat. "Mother said that I can milk tonight." "So," was his only reply. Maudie knew that Gidley was just a wee bit jealous, and it felt delicious. If only Mother would hurry and come, she was tired of waiting. The sun was sinking low in the west before Mother finally stepped out of the house and walked briskly to the milk house. There she picked up her pail and little bench. No one-legged stool would do for her. Out in the barn lot, Maudie and Mother began calling the cows, "Sue, lady! Sue, Bessie!" Her older brothers, Tobe, Dan, and Jake, left their work in the field when they heard them calling. They, too, each had a cow to milk. Mother told Maudie to milk Bessie, a small Jersey cow. "What are you doing out here, Maudie?" Jake asked, noticing the tin pail and one-legged stool in her hands. "I'm going to milk, 'cause Mother said I can," she answered proudly. Maudie sat on her little stool like Mother did and waited for the cows to come. They ambled up from the pasture and obediently stopped before them, Lady in front of Mother, and Bessie in front of Maudie. The cows did not need feed to keep them quiet, nor a rope to tie them with. They were well trained and knew what was expected of them. Lady always knew exactly where to stand, so Mother seldom needed to move her little bench. But Bessie walked just a little past Maudie. Maudie moved her stool over, and in the process tipped too far and went sprawling in the dust. sending the tin pail clattering beneath the cow. "Oh, be careful!" Mother cried in alarm. She jumped up and hurried to Maudie's side. Bessie stepped away from them and hit her hoof on the pail, making a big dent in its side. Mother helped Maudie get back into the milking position and showed her how to hold a bucket between her knees and squeeze the milk from the large red teats. Streams of milk pinged hard into the pail as Mother squeezed with strong, firm hands. Maudie nodded each time Mother paused to explain her techniques. She was sure she could do just as Mother did, but try as she might, only small, sticky drops of milk squeezed out and dribbled down her arm. Finally, she took one teat in both hands and squeezed hard until her arm shook. Even less milk came out than before. Still she tried, not willing to admit defeat. Tobe was nearly finished milking his cow, so Mother asked him to milk Maudie's cow for her. "What's wrong, little Bets?" he asked and pinched her shoulder. "I don't think Bessie has any milk in her tonight," Maudie said in exasperation. She did not want Tobe to help her. "Well, you have to know how to do it," he teased her. Reluctantly, she let him take her place and watched as great streams of milk swooshed into the pail. He patiently showed her how to close off the top of the teat so no milk could go back up into the cow's bag. Then she could squeeze with her higher fingers first and push the milk down and out. So she tried once more and was surprised at the streams of milk that splashed and foamed in the pail. The next morning, Maudie was up early, so she would not miss the milking. Father, a carpenter, was out on the prairie building a new schoolhouse this week. Maudie was sure he would be surprised when he came home and learned that she knew how to milk a cow. And by Friday, she was sure she would be a fine milker. One particularly warm and calm day, Mother told the children they could do as they pleased for several hours. She and 18-month-old Mary were going to lie down for a much-needed rest. So Sarah, who seemed nearly grown at the age of 13, got her 9-patch quilt top and sat on the porch steps to work on it. 14-year-old Tobe stretched out on the porch swing to take a nap. The rest of the children, Dan, who was 12, Jake, 9, Maudie, and Gidley, decided to play a game of hide-and-seek. Dan was it first. He plopped down on the fresh spring grass that grew beside the wash-house wall, called the base, and closed his eyes. The rest of the children scattered, each one searching for a place to hide where Dan would not think to look. He began counting to 100 in a loud voice. Maudie slipped quietly into the buggy shed, careful not to move the door for fear it would creak and give a clue to her hiding spot. Then she quickly climbed into the buggy, a horse-drawn surrey, and slid beneath the seat. Psst! Maudie jumped in surprise and turned to find Puff lying back in the corner with a nest of kittens. Puff, I thought you were a snake." She wiggled around to get a better look at the newborn kittens. Psst! Puff hissed at her again, warning her not to get too close. So Maudie turned around and tried to make herself as small as possible. The heat prickled her scalp and made her want to scratch her back. Just then Dan yelled, "Coming ready or not!" She wiggled her feet and Puff hissed at her again. "Be quiet, Puff. You're going to give me away yet," Maudie whispered in disgust. Just then she heard the shed door creak ever so slightly. She closed her eyes, pretending to be invisible. "I see you, Maudie!" Dan shouted triumphantly and turned to run back to the base before Maudie reached it. If she got there first, she would be free. But if Dan got there first, then Maudie would have to be it for the next game. She scrambled out from beneath the seat and jumped down from the buggy. 1, 2, 3 on Maudie, she heard him yell. Well, there was no reason to run any more, for he had beaten her. She plopped down beside the wash house to wait for Dan to find the others. Her hair clung to her face in damp curls. She pushed them back and tucked them beneath her cap, a bonnet type of prayer veil the Amish wore. Her dress clung to her and made her feel sticky all over. Maudie saw a slight movement out of the corner of her eye and turned to see Gidley sliding out from beneath the porch on his stomach. He winked, and she giggled in spite of herself. Dan was nowhere in sight, so he jumped up and ran pell-mell for the wash-house. He slapped Maudie on her shoulder and yelled, "Free!" "Hey, I'm not base!" she laughed. He ran in a wide circle before coming back to touch the wall of the wash-house to make himself officially free. Then he rolled over in the grass to wait for Dan to come running. But Dan did not appear. The whole prairie seemed deathly still. Not a blade of grass rustled, and no birds were singing. "Oh, it's hot!" Maudie pulled her dress away from her skin and tried to fan herself with her skirt. Gidley wiped his face with his shirt sleeve. Suddenly, Dan and Jake burst through the barn doors and shouted for everyone to look at the dark cloud in the southwest. Maudie and Gidley hurried around the corner of the wash house. At the same time, Sarah and Tobe jumped up and gasped at the greenish-black cloud approaching them. "Mother!" they screamed together. "Mother!" The cloud was boiling in anger, with scaly and fragmented edges. The children stood rooted to the ground, unable to think or move. Mother burst through the back door, then stopped, and her hands flew to her mouth. The cloud slowly began bulging in the center, and an ugly tail dropped down to the prairie. Great clouds of dust rose in angry swirls. "It's a cyclone," Mother stated flatly. "If it comes too close, we'll go to the cellar." Maudie wanted to go to the cellar right away, but no one moved, so she remained still. The wicked tail swung in sickening slow arcs, back and forth, back and forth. "Can we go now, Mother?" Maudie asked feebly. "We'll go if it comes past the railroad." But Maudie wanted to go now. She was trembling from head to foot, and her teeth chattered. The railroad was only a quarter of a mile from their house, and that seemed too close. She thought of Father and for a brief second of baby Mary, but the ever-approaching storm diverted her attention, and she stared wide-eyed in horror. Buckets and boxes began flying past, and chickens half flew, half tumbled across the barnyard. But Mother stood firm, her face tense, yet unafraid. Still the cyclone came on. When the cyclone was almost to the railroad, Maudie thought they could stand still no longer. Just then it turned east and went whirling and swinging across the prairie. Maudie felt more than heard Mother's great sigh of relief and her quiet, "Thank God!" Her apparent calm and trust amazed Maudie and filled her with awe and admiration. She knew Mother was praying while they faced the frightening cyclone, and she knew, too, that they had just witnessed a wonderful miracle. End of chapter 1.